A thug kicks a service dog at a bus stop, sending the golden retriever flying while its blind veteran owner cries out in helpless anguish. The cruel punk and his crew laugh as they terrorize the 68-year-old Vietnam hero, mocking his military service while the injured dog whimpers on the concrete. But the large stranger sitting quietly on the bench behind them isn't just reading a philosophy book. This is Steven Seagal himself. The thug has no idea he just attacked a warrior's best friend in front of a man who spent 23 years as a cop and 50 years perfecting the deadliest martial art on earth. While the bully threatens to hurt the dog again, the aikido master rises to his full intimidating height with prayer beads clicking softly in his weathered hands. The veteran recognizes his guardian angel and grips his cane tighter, knowing swift justice is about to be delivered. The punk's friends keep recording, thinking they're capturing another easy victim, but they're actually filming their leader's worst mistake. What happens when you cross the line in front of a living legend? Will the thug survive learning why some warriors never truly retire? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness at exactly 6:47 a.m., just as it had every Thursday morning for the past 15 years. Marcus Webb's weathered hand found the button with practiced precision, silencing the mechanical intrusion before it could disturb his neighbor through the paper-thin walls of the efficiency apartment at T68. Marcus moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had learned to navigate the world without sight. His fingers traced the familiar path across the nightstand. Prescription bottles arranged in military formation, worn leather wallet containing his VA identification, and the single photograph he couldn't see but touched every morning anyway. Sarah's smile lived only in his memory now, but the frame reminded him that love had once blessed his life. "Morning, Ranger," he whispered to the golden retriever rising from his bed beside the window. The dog's tail thumped against the floor. In response, a sound that never failed to lift Marcus's spirits. "Ready for another adventure, boy?" The apartment was sparse but immaculate. Every item had its designated place. Coffee maker on the kitchen counter's left side, clean shirts hanging in order of wear, medications sorted by day, and time in a plastic organizer Sarah had bought him years before her cancer diagnosis. The discipline that had kept him alive in the jungles of Vietnam now sustained him through a different kind of survival. That Marcus's fingers moved across the dresser's surface, finding his service medals in their felt-lined box. He never wore them. Too many people saw the decorations as either pity triggers or political statements. But touching the bronze star and purple heart reminded him that he had once been a protector, not just protected. The ritual of preparation unfolded with military precision. Pills dispensed into his palm, each one counted and identified by size and texture. Clean shirt selected and buttoned carefully, collar straight despite the frayed edges. His remaining $23 folded into his wallet, enough for bus fare and maybe a cup of coffee if the VA appointment ran long. Ranger approached with the guide harness draped across his back, a signal that work time had begun. The retriever had learned Marcus's routines better than most humans learned their own. Every Thursday meant the same journey, 6 blocks through downtown Phoenix to catch the 8:15 bus to the VA Medical Center. The appointment itself was routine, maintenance for an aging body held together by stubbornness and pride, but it represented something more precious, a connection to the world beyond these 4 walls. "Let's go earn our keep," Marcus said, running his hands over Ranger's head in the gesture that meant trust, partnership, and unconditional love all at once. The dog's brown eyes held intelligence and devotion that humbled Marcus every day. In a world that had forgotten his service and dismissed his worth, Ranger saw only a man deserving of loyalty. The morning air hit them as they stepped onto the sidewalk, already thick with Phoenix heat despite the early hour. Commuters rushed past, their footsteps creating a symphony of purpose that Marcus navigated by sound and intuition. Cell phone conversations mixed with car engines, coffee shop music, and the distant rumble of construction that never seemed to stop in this growing city. Ranger guided him through the familiar obstacle course of sidewalk cracks, parked bicycles, and outdoor restaurant signs. The dog paused at each intersection, waiting for Marcus's command before proceeding. Trust flowed both ways in their partnership. Marcus trusted Ranger's eyes, while Ranger trusted Marcus's judgment about when it was safe to cross. The bus stop came into view, marked by the gathering crowd of early commuters and the distinctive sound of diesel engines warming up for another day of urban transportation. The downtown bus stop buzzed with typical Thursday morning energy as Marcus and Ranger arrived at 8:10 a.m., slightly winded from their 6-block journey through increasingly crowded sidewalks. The digital display announced an 8:20 arrival time. The bus was running late again, a minor inconvenience that had become as predictable as his weekly appointment schedule. Ranger guided him toward the bench where he could sense available space beside another passenger. The man was large enough that Marcus could feel his presence without contact, and something about his stillness suggested patience rather than restless urban energy. Most commuters fidgeted with phones or tapped feet, but this stranger emanated a calm that reminded Marcus of seasoned soldiers he'd known in Vietnam, men who had learned to find peace within chaos. "Thank you," Marcus said softly as the man shifted slightly, making more room without being asked. Such courtesies were rare in downtown Phoenix, where most people seemed to view homeless-looking veterans as invisible at best, threatening at worst. As Marcus settled onto the bench with Ranger at his feet, he caught a glimpse of the book in the stranger's hands. The pages made a distinctive whisper as they turned, thick, quality paper that suggested serious reading rather than paperback entertainment. The man's breathing was deep and controlled, the rhythm of someone comfortable with meditation or martial arts practiced. Ranger's ears perked at something, his training alert but not alarmed. The dog's body language told Marcus that potential trouble was approaching before his own hearing picked up the voices. 3 young men were moving through the crowd with the aggressive swagger that Marcus had learned to recognize and avoid. Their conversation carried the sharp edge of chemical enhancement. Too loud, too crude, too eager for confrontation. The stranger beside him turned another page with unhurried precision, but Marcus sensed a subtle shift in his posture. Professional awareness, the kind that came from years of reading dangerous situations. The man's left hand remained visible on the book while his right moved to rest casually on his knee, a position that looked relaxed but offered tactical options. "Can't believe that bitch threw me out," one of the approaching voices complained. 3 years I'm with Vanessa, and she acts like I'm the problem. All because I borrowed some money from her purse." "Stole, you mean?" Another voice laughed. "Darius, man, you gotta learn the difference." The commuters around the bus stop were typical urban professionals. Office workers checking phones, college students with backpacks, elderly shoppers with rolling bags. None of them looked like they'd intervene if trouble started. Most were already shifting away from the approaching disturbance, the instinctive herd behavior of people who'd learned that downtown Phoenix could turn dangerous without warning. Marcus felt Ranger tense slightly beneath his palm. The dog's training included threat assessment, and something about the approaching group triggered his protective instincts. Still, Ranger remained perfectly still, waiting for Marcus's command or clear danger before acting. The stranger's page turning stopped. The book remained open, but Marcus could sense the man's attention had shifted completely to the 3 young men now entering the bus stop area. His breathing remained steady, but there was something about his stillness that reminded Marcus of hunters he'd known, absolutely motionless until the moment for action arrived. Conversations around the bus stop grew quieter as other commuters noticed the new arrivals. Cell phones appeared, some obviously recording in anticipation of entertainment. The modern urban phenomenon of turning conflict into social media content had replaced any impulse to help or intervene. The 3 young men spread out in a loose formation that Marcus recognized from military tactics, not coordinated enough to be trained, but instinctive pack behavior that maximized intimidation while providing multiple escape routes. Their leader's voice carried the artificial confidence of someone whose courage came from a bottle or needle. "Look around, boys," the voice said, now close enough that Marcus could smell unwashed clothes and chemical sweat. "Plenty of decent people trying to get to work, and then we got this situation taking up space where taxpayers belong." Ranger's muscles coiled beneath Marcus's palm. The dog understood tone and body language better than most humans, and everything about this situation screamed threat to his primary mission of protecting Marcus. Still, years of training held him in place, waiting for either a direct command or an actual attack before responding. The stranger closed his book with a soft sound that somehow carried more menace than a slamming door. Darius Kane swaggered toward the bus stop with the chemical confidence that came from his morning cocktail of methamphetamine and entitlement. At 28, he'd never held a real job for more than 3 months, never faced serious consequences for his actions, and never met a problem that his uncle's badge couldn't solve. The world owed him comfort, respect, and entertainment, and this morning he intended to collect. "I'm telling you, it's all about respect," he announced to his companions, Trey and Miko, who trailed behind him like eager hyenas. "Vanessa disrespected me by changing the locks. The landlord disrespected me by believing her lies. And now I gotta ride public transportation like some kind of peasant." His designer sneakers, the only items he maintained in pristine condition, squeaked against the concrete as he surveyed the bus stop like a predator choosing prey. Office workers in their pressed shirts and sensible shoes, college kids with their expensive backpacks, elderly shoppers clutching purses. All of them represented the stable, productive life that seemed to exist just beyond his reach. Then his bloodshot eyes landed on Marcus. The old man sat quietly on the bench, one hand resting on his guide dog's head, white cane propped against his knee. Everything about him screamed vulnerability. The carefully mended shirt, the worn shoes polished to military shine, the resigned patience of someone accustomed to waiting for systems designed by others. "Perfect. Look at this welfare leech taking up space where decent people sit," Darius said, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire bus stop. Several commuters looked up from their phones, some already switching to video mode. "Living off my tax dollars while real Americans work for a living." Marcus kept his head down, weathered fingers tightening almost imperceptibly on Ranger's harness. The dog sensed his owner's distress but remained perfectly still, years of training overriding every protective instinct. His brown eyes tracked the approaching threat while his body coiled with barely contained readiness. Trey snickered, emboldened by his leader's performance. "Maybe he's saving up for a seeing eye upgrade. This one looks pretty raggedy." "I'm talking to you, old man." Darius's voice cracked with artificial authority as he stepped directly in front of Marcus, blocking his access to the approaching bus. "You and your fleabag dog are what's wrong with this city. Taking up space, soaking up benefits, making decent people uncomfortable." The crowd of commuters had formed a loose circle now, phones held at recording angles, but maintaining careful distance. This was entertainment, not their problem. Someone would post it online later with clever commentary about urban decay or veteran services. But right now, they were just consumers of content being created at an old man's expense. Marcus raised his head slightly, blind eyes focusing somewhere past Darius's shoulder. "Please, sir. I'm just waiting for the bus to my medical appointment. I don't want any trouble." The politeness seemed to infuriate Darius more than defiance would have. Respect earned through violence he could understand, but this quiet dignity made him feel small and mean, emotions he'd learned to transform into rage rather than self-examination. "Maybe you're deaf and dumb, Grandpa," he snarled. Reaching into his pocket for the folding knife, he carried more for show than use. "Let me speak your language." But Ranger's golden coat made an easier target than an old man's dignity. Darius drew back his steel-toed boot, aiming for the dog's ribs with the casual cruelty of someone who'd learned to hurt smaller things to feel powerful. "This should get your attention." The large stranger on the bench had been motionless throughout. The confrontation apparently absorbed in his thick book about physics and philosophy. But as Darius's foot began its arc toward Ranger, the book snapped shut with a sound like a judge's gavel. Marcus gasped, "No, please." But the boot was already in motion, and 30 years of unchecked entitlement was behind it, the steel-toed boot connected with Ranger's ribs in a sickening thud that carried across the suddenly silent bus stop. The golden retriever yelped in pain and surprise, his 70-pound body stumbling sideways as air exploded from his lungs. For 5 years, Ranger had been Marcus's eyes, his independence, his connection to a world that had largely forgotten both of them. Now he lay gasping on the concrete, trying to struggle back to his feet, while his internal training warred with the pain radiating through his chest. Ranger. Marcus's cry tore from somewhere deep in his soul, the sound of a man watching his last meaningful relationship being destroyed for sport. His weathered hands reached blindly for his companion, finding the dog's trembling flank and feeling for broken ribs with the gentle expertise of someone who'd treated wounded soldiers in another lifetime. Darius Kane threw back his head and laughed, the chemical high amplifying his cruelty into something approaching ecstasy. Oops, did I hurt your little helper? He turned to high-five Trey and Miko, both of whom were recording the assault with their phones, already imagining the social media likes they'd earned from this morning's entertainment. The crowd of commuters maintained their careful distance, some still filming, but none intervening. A few looked uncomfortable, but discomfort wasn't enough to overcome the urban survival instinct that said involvement meant danger. Someone else's problem, someone else's responsibility, someone else's moral failure. The approaching bus, Marcus's lifeline to medical care and human dignity, slowed as the driver noticed the commotion. But instead of opening doors to offer sanctuary, the vehicle remained sealed while its operator reached for his radio to report a disturbance. Protocol trumped compassion. Procedure took precedence over protection. Marcus knelt on the concrete beside Ranger, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down his weathered cheeks. His fingers found the dog's injury with practiced care, checking for the kind of damage that could steal away his independence forever. Ranger whimpered and tried to lick his master's face, attempting comfort even through his own pain. Maybe. Keep him out of the way next time, Grandpa, Darius sneered, already turning toward the bus with the satisfied swagger of someone who'd proven his dominance over a weaker opponent. In his drug-addled mind, he'd won something important, shown these people that there were still hierarchies, still consequences for taking up space that belonged to better men. But as he stepped toward the bus doors, confident in his immunity from consequences, a voice cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. That was a mistake. The words were spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but they carried an authority that made every person at the bus stop turn toward their source. Even Darius paused, his chemically enhanced bravado flickering as some deeper instinct recognized the presence of genuine danger. The large stranger rose from the bench with fluid grace that belied his age, the book now tucked under his arm like a weapon awaiting deployment. He stood 6 feet 4 inches in his socks, broad shoulders filling out a dark shirt that had seen better days but was maintained with military precision. His graying hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and Tibetan prayer beads clicked softly around his wrist as he moved. But it was his eyes that transformed the entire atmosphere of the bus stop. Dark, penetrating, and absolutely calm. They held the kind of focus that Marcus remembered from the deadliest soldiers he'd served within Vietnam. Men who could kill you before you realized you were in danger, but who chose their battles with the wisdom that came from understanding the true cost of violence. The stranger's gaze moved from Marcus kneeling beside his injured dog to Darius Kane frozen halfway to the bus door. And in that moment, every person present understood that the morning's entertainment had just become something far more serious. The prayer beads clicked once more as the stranger took a single step forward, and Darius Kane found himself staring into the face of consequences he'd never imagined possible. Steven Seagal faced Darius Kane across the concrete plaza, his presence transforming the bus stop from urban transit hub into something approaching a dojo. The morning sun caught the silver threads in his ponytail as he stood motionless, prayer beads silent now against his wrist, dark eyes fixed on the young man with laser intensity. Darius looked up at the imposing figure, his drug-fueled confidence wavering for the first time in years. Something about the stranger radiated danger, not the theatrical aggression Darius was used to projecting, but the quiet lethality of a man who'd spent decades learning to end conflicts before they truly began. Who the hell are you, old man? Darius's voice cracked slightly, the chemical bravado fighting against increasingly urgent survival instincts. This ain't your business. Walk away while you still can. Trey and Miko flanked their leader but kept their distance, phones still recording but hands no longer steady. The entertainment value was rapidly being replaced by genuine unease as they recognized something their drug-addled brains couldn't quite process: the difference between posturing and actual capability. Seagal's voice dropped to his signature whisper, each word carrying more menace than Darius's loudest threats. You just heard a warrior's best friend. That requires correction. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that viral content was about to be created, but maintaining careful distance from whatever was about to unfold. Bus passengers peered through tinted windows while the driver continued his radio conversation with dispatch, protocol preventing him from simply leaving the scene. Recognition dawned slowly across Darius's face, chemically delayed but inevitable. The height, the ponytail, the whispered delivery, the unmistakable presence. Pieces clicked together in his methamphetamine-fogged brain like tumblers in a lock. "Holy shit," he burst out, pointing dramatically. "You're Steven Seagal. Dude, I loved your movies. Back in 1991. His fear transformed into mocking laughter as he turned to his friends. "Check this out, boys. We got ourselves a genuine has-been action hero." Trey and Miko joined the laughter, making exaggerated martial arts gestures and mimicking movie fight scenes. "What are you gonna do? Teach us aikido," Miko called out. "Throw us around like a movie stunt." "This is real life, not Hollywood, Grandpa." Darius sneered, his confidence returning as the crowd's phones captured what he assumed would be his humiliation of a washed-up celebrity. "You can't edit out getting your ass kicked by someone young enough to be your grandson." But Seagal remained perfectly still, his breathing deep and controlled, hands loose at his sides in the classical ready position. Marcus, still kneeling beside the injured ranger, recognized something in the man's posture that Darius's drug-addled perception missed entirely: the absolute stillness that preceded devastating action. "In Aikido," Seagal said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the plaza despite its whispered volume, "we redirect aggression rather than meeting it with force. We use the attacker's own energy against them." Darius laughed louder, emboldened by what he mistook for weakness. "Save the philosophy for your next straight-to-video disaster, old man. This is the real world." He drew back his fist, still grinning, still confident that size and youth would triumph over age and movie magic. But as his arm began its wild swing, Seagal's eyes never blinked. "Like this," the Aikido master whispered. Darius Kane's haymaker came fast and wild, powered by methamphetamine. Fury and 30 years of consequences avoided. But Steven Seagal had been reading violent intentions for 5 decades, and this telegraphed assault moved like slow motion compared to the trained killers he'd faced in darker places. That Seagal's response was pure Aikido poetry. No blocking, no meeting force with force, just fluid redirection that used Darius's own momentum against him. His left hand guided the incoming fist past his face, while his right found the young man's wrist, applying pressure with surgical precision to nerves that most people didn't know existed. The crowd gasped as Darius's confident swing became an off-balance stumble, his body following physical laws that his drug-addled brain couldn't comprehend. Seagal's movements flowed like water around rock, each technique building on the last as he applied a classic aikido wrist lock that brought his attacker to his knees. "What the?" Darius's snarl became a gasp of pain as pressure points along his arm lit up like Christmas lights. His legs buckled involuntarily, not from strikes, but from his nervous system being manipulated by someone who understood human anatomy better than most doctors. Trey and Miko rushed forward to help their leader, but stopped short when Seagal's free hand moved to another ready position. "I suggest you tend to your friend instead," he said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The Aikido master maintained perfect control, applying just enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage. Darius tried to rise, but found his legs unresponsive. Seagal had targeted specific nerve clusters that temporarily disrupted motor function without causing lasting harm. But as quickly as it had begun, the confrontation was over. Seagal released his hold and immediately moved to kneel beside Marcus and Ranger, his large hands gentle as a veterinarian's as he examined the injured dog. The transformation from warrior to healer was instantaneous and complete. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Ranger, who responded to the calm authority in his voice by relaxing slightly. "Let me see what we're dealing with here." Marcus raised his head, tears still streaming, but hope flickering in his blind eyes. "Is he going to be all right?" Seagal's hands moved expertly along Ranger's ribs, finding swelling but no obvious breaks. "Bruised, but not broken." He'll need a vet to be sure, but I think your partner's tougher than he looks. 23 years as a police officer taught me that bullies only understand one language, Seagal said softly, glancing back at Darius, who sat rubbing his wrist in stunned silence. But I prefer teaching it through consequences rather than violence. The crowd remained mesmerized, phones still recording, but the mood completely changed. What had begun as entertainment at an old man's expense had become something else entirely, a demonstration of what happened when genuine skill met artificial courage. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer as someone's 911 call brought official attention to the disturbance. Seagal helped Marcus to his feet, while Ranger struggled gamely upright, limping but mobile. "Are you both going to be all right?" Seagal asked, his voice carrying genuine concern rather than celebrity politeness. Marcus gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Thank you. I don't know who you are, but thank you." The first police car rounded the corner, emergency lights painting the morning crowd in alternating red and blue. Detective Rita Morales stepped out, immediately recognizing the tall figure kneeling beside the veteran and his dog, her expression mixing respect with professional concern as she surveyed the scene. Detective Rita Morales approached the bus stop. With 15 years of experience reading crime scenes, but this tableau defied easy categorization. A crowd of commuters with phones still recording, one young man sitting on concrete rubbing his wrist, an elderly veteran kneeling beside an injured service dog, and Steven Seagal, unmistakably Steven Seagal, standing calmly in the center of it all. "What happened here?" she asked, though multiple witnesses were already volunteering their accounts before she'd finished the question. "That psycho attacked me," Darius Kane shouted from his position on the ground, pointing dramatically at Seagal while struggling to his feet. "I want him arrested for assault. I got witnesses, I got video evidence. I want this maniac locked up." Morales had heard Darius's name before. Too many complaints filed and mysteriously dropped. Too many incidents that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She glanced at Seagal, who stood quietly with his hands visible, offering no resistance or explanation. "He's lying," called out a woman in a business suit, holding up her phone. "I got the whole thing recorded. That punk kicked the poor dog first. Then this gentleman defended them." More witnesses chimed in, their testimonies remarkably consistent despite coming from strangers. The video evidence was overwhelming, multiple angles showing Darius's unprovoked attack on Ranger, followed by what looked more like a martial arts demonstration than a street fight. But Darius played his trump card with the practiced desperation of someone who'd learned to weaponize family connections. "My uncle is Deputy Chief Floyd Kane. He's going to hear about this harassment, and he's going to want answers about why some Hollywood has-been thinks he can assault citizens." The name hit Morales like cold water. Deputy Chief Kane's reputation for protecting family members was legendary throughout the department, and challenging him meant career suicide for officers who valued their badges more than their consciences. She'd seen good cops transferred to dead-end assignments for crossing the Kane family. More patrol cars arrived, their occupants immediately recognizing the Kane name and treating Darius with deference that the evidence clearly didn't support. Whispered conversations between officers created an atmosphere where witness testimony became less important than political considerations. "Look, Mr. Seagal," Morales said quietly, genuinely conflicted between duty and justice. "I know what the videos show, but I have to follow procedure here. Complaint's been filed," and with his family connections, she let the sentence hang, hoping he'd understand the impossible position she was in. Good cops learned to pick their battles carefully, and challenging Deputy Chief Kane required more ammunition than a single incident could provide. "I understand," Seagal replied calmly, extending his hands for the handcuffs. "Sometimes the system needs time to find justice." As the cuffs clicked into place, he turned to Marcus one final time. "Take Ranger to the vet. Get him checked properly. I'll handle this." Marcus grabbed his arm with desperate strength, blind eyes wide with sudden understanding. "You don't know what you're dealing with. They've been doing this to veterans for months. This is bigger than just my dog." His words carried a weight that made Morales pause, her detective instincts recognizing the difference between paranoid rambling and credible intelligence. Marcus's voice held the steady authority of someone reporting facts rather than theories. "There are dozens of us. Marcus continued urgently as Seagal was led toward the patrol car. Jerry lost his wheelchair to vandals. Paula had her medications confiscated. They're targeting us systematically, and you just put yourself in their crosshairs. The bus doors finally opened, passengers boarding while carefully avoiding eye contact with the unfolding drama. Life in downtown Phoenix had taught people that involvement meant complications, and complications meant danger. As the police car pulled away, Seagal's last view was of Marcus kneeling beside Ranger, both of them looking smaller and more vulnerable than they had just minutes before. The Phoenix police station's interview room felt smaller than its actual dimensions when Deputy Chief Floyd Kane stormed through the door at 10:30 a.m., his bulk barely contained by an expensive suit that couldn't hide the soft corruption of easy living. At 52, Kane had spent more years manipulating the system than serving it, and his red face broadcast rage that had nothing to do with justice. Steven Seagal sat calmly in the metal chair, hands folded, prayer beads still around his wrist. Despite the handcuffs that had been removed upon arrival, his breathing remained steady and controlled, the product of decades spent finding inner peace amid external chaos. You think you're some kind of hero? Kane slammed the door hard enough to rattle the one-way mirror. Attacking innocent citizens. Playing tough guy with your movie star bullshit. Seagal didn't respond, which seemed to infuriate Kane further. The deputy chief's political career had been built on intimidation and bluster, tactics that required reaction to be effective. Silence was a defense he hadn't learned to overcome. I know all about you, Seagal. Washed-up action star trying to relive his glory days by beating up kids. Well, this isn't Hollywood, and I'm not some studio executive you can impress with your fake tough guy act. But Kane's rant revealed more than he intended. His detailed knowledge about downtown homeless camps, his complaints about transients ruining development opportunities, his casual mention of family real estate interests, each word painted a clearer picture of systematic oppression disguised as law enforcement. My family's been cleaning up this city for 3 generations, Kane continued, pacing behind the interview table like a caged predator. We don't need some celebrity do-gooder interfering with legitimate police work. The slip was subtle but telling. Kane referred to harassing veterans as legitimate police work, while simultaneously defending it as family business. Seagal filed away each contradiction, building a mental case file that would prove useful later. You know what really pisses me off? Kane leaned across the table, his breath carrying the sour smell of stress and antacids. These homeless freaks think they own the downtown, taking up space where decent people want to build businesses, scaring away tourists with their pathetic begging. More intelligence emerged through Kane's anger, specific knowledge of veteran locations, coordinated timing with VA appointment schedules, detailed planning that suggested systematic rather than random harassment. This wasn't opportunistic cruelty. It was organized oppression with financial motivation. My nephew might be a hothead, but he's got more right to those streets than some blind beggar and his fleabag dog, Kane snarled. At least Darius contributes to the local economy. The interview room door opened, interrupting Kane's tirade. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, supported by a volunteer from the VA, carrying a folder of documentation that looked both official and damning. Deputy Chief Kane, Marcus said with quiet dignity that made the corrupt official's bluster seem even more pathetic by comparison. I believe we need to discuss the pattern of harassment your officers have been conducting against homeless veterans. Kane's face went from red to pale as Marcus spread photographs and incident reports across the interview table. Jerry's sabotaged wheelchair, Paula's confiscated medications, Eddie's false arrest reports, a systematic campaign of terror documented with military precision. There are dozens of us, Marcus said, his blind eyes somehow finding Kane's face. Despite his disability, we've been keeping records, building cases, waiting for someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought. Seagal looked at the evidence spread before him, understanding for the first time the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't about one punk kicking one dog. It was about institutional corruption, using police power to clear valuable real estate of inconvenient human beings. Kane's bluster evaporated as he realized his morning's victory lap had become a confession session. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in his career, family connections might not be enough to save him. Marcus leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced worse enemies than small-time tyrants. "They've been hunting us for months, Mr. Seagal, and now they're going to come for everyone who helped us." The sun had set behind the Phoenix skyline by the time Steven Seagal followed Marcus Webb through the industrial wasteland beneath the 7th Street Bridge. Released on bail thanks to overwhelming witness testimony, Seagal found himself entering a hidden world that existed in the shadows of Arizona's booming metropolis. The encampment defied every stereotype about homeless communities. Tarps stretched between concrete support pillars created orderly living spaces, each marked by small personal touches that spoke of dignity maintained despite circumstances. Makeshift furniture constructed from discarded materials showed engineering skills and pride, while small cooking fires provided both warmth and community gathering points. "Welcome to our neighborhood," Marcus said as curious faces emerged from the shadows. "Not much to look at, but it's home." Jerry Kowalski rolled forward in his wheelchair, the 71-year-old Marine's upper body still powerful despite legs that hadn't worked since a Vietnam IED took them 40 years ago. His gray mustache was perfectly trimmed, and his bright blue eyes sparkled with mischief that war and homelessness hadn't dimmed. "So you're the guy who taught that cane punk some manners," Jerry grinned, extending a calloused hand. "About damn time someone showed those badges what real authority looks like." Paula Rodriguez emerged from behind a tarp partition, her missing left arm immediately noticeable but not diminishing the military bearing that marked her as a former soldier. At 49, her intelligence background showed in the way her brown eyes constantly assessed surroundings and cataloged potential threats. "Army medic, Desert Storm," she said simply, offering her right hand. "Lost the arm to shrapnel while evacuating wounded civilians. Figured you should know who you're dealing with before we start sharing war stories." More veterans appeared as word spread through the camp. Eddie Chun, Navy Gulf War veteran whose PTSD made steady employment impossible. Frank Morrison, Air Force mechanic whose plant closure had led to this concrete sanctuary. Each had military experience. Each had been systematically targeted by Kane's crew, and each had documentation of harassment that painted a disturbing pattern. Ranger limped beside Marcus, but moved more easily after veterinary attention from a volunteer clinic. The dog's injury had galvanized the veteran community in ways that attacks on humans hadn't. Something about hurting a service animal crossed lines that even desperate people wouldn't tolerate. Around a small fire built in a metal drum, the stories emerged. Stolen belongings that happened to coincide with construction permits. Destroyed medications that forced veterans into emergency rooms during business development meetings. False arrests timed to remove witnesses when property values were being assessed. "It's not random," Paula said, spreading out a hand-drawn map marked with incident locations and dates. Her intelligence training showed in the detailed analysis of patterns that others might miss. "They're herding us away from prime real estate. Someone's making serious money off our misery." Cross-referencing harassment incidents with downtown development projects revealed systematic coordination. Veterans were being driven from areas slated for gentrification, their removal clearing the way for luxury condos and upscale businesses that wouldn't tolerate homeless populations. "Every Thursday they hit us hardest," Jerry explained. "VA appointment days, when most of us are scattered across the city getting medical care. Maximum impact when we can't protect each other." Seagal listened intently, his spiritual training helping him process the scope of institutional cruelty being described. This wasn't individual evil. It was systematic oppression using police power for private profit. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. Marcus touched Ranger's head. Gently. 2 years of escalation. But yesterday, when they hurt my dog, they crossed a line they can't uncross. The Phoenix Public Library's computer terminal section buzzed with quiet morning activity as Paula Rodriguez navigated property databases with the focused intensity of her former Army intelligence role. Her one good hand flew across the keyboard. While Seagal took notes, both of them aware that public records could reveal patterns that official investigations might miss. Deputy Chief Kane's brother Malcolm owns 3 major parcels, Paula said, pulling up property records that painted a clear picture of financial motivation. All currently zoned for low-income housing, all with pending applications to rezone for luxury development. The documentation was damning. Cross-referencing harassment incident locations with property ownership maps showed perfect correlation. Veterans were being systematically driven from areas that the Kane family wanted to develop. Public records revealed city contracts awarded to Kane family businesses without proper competitive bidding. Environmental assessments waived for projects that should have required extensive review. Look at this timeline. Paula continued, her intelligence background evident in how she organized information. Every major harassment campaign corresponds with zoning board meetings. They clear us out, then argue that the areas are suitable for upscale development because the vagrant problem has been solved. Additional research revealed the scope of corruption. Malcolm Kane's construction company had received no-bid contracts worth millions. City inspectors had rubber-stamped permits that should have taken months of review, and environmental impact studies had been waived for developments near sensitive areas. It's a machine, Seagal observed, watching Paula compile evidence with military precision. They use police power to clear land, then profit from development. Clean, profitable, and completely illegal. Banking records accessible through public disclosure showed suspicious cash flows between city accounts and Kane family businesses. Construction loans approved without standard oversight, city infrastructure projects that coincidentally benefited Kane properties, and municipal bond issues that seemed designed to fund private development. Paula printed key documents as closing time approached, her movements efficient despite using only one hand. Years of adapting to her disability had made her more capable than most people with full use of their limbs. "We need to document the federal angle," she said, organizing papers with practice skill. "If they're using federal housing funds for private development, that's racketeering. FBI jurisdiction trumps local corruption every time." As they prepared to leave, Paula spotted an unmarked police car in the library parking lot, the same vehicle that had been following them since morning. The driver was trying to look casual while obviously conducting surveillance. "We're not just investigating them anymore," she told Seagal as they walked toward the exit. "They're watching us back." This escalated fast once you got involved. The surveillance confirmed Paula's suspicions about the scope of Kane family operations. This wasn't casual corruption. It was organized crime using police resources for private profit. Anyone threatening their system would face retaliation. "Jerry's wheelchair was sabotaged last night," Paula continued, her voice tight with anger. "Brake cables cut with surgical precision. He could have been killed rolling down those ramps." The message was clear. The Kane family wouldn't tolerate investigation or resistance. Veterans who had survived foreign wars were being terrorized on American streets by the very people sworn to protect them. "They know we're building a case," Seagal said, noting the surveillance vehicle following at careful distance. "Which means they're planning countermeasures." Paula's military training kicked in as she assessed their tactical situation. "We need more evidence before they shut us down completely. And we need federal attention before local corruption buries everything." "How long do we have?" Seagal asked. Paula glanced back at their tail, calculating resources and response times with professional expertise. "Based on their escalation pattern, maybe 48 hours before they move against everyone who's helped us." The stakes were rising, and time was running out. The abandoned warehouse in Phoenix's industrial district looked like countless others that dotted the city's periphery. Corrugated metal walls, broken windows, and weeds growing through cracked asphalt. But by 8 a.m., it had been transformed into a high-tech surveillance command center that would have impressed Hollywood's finest technical crews. Seagal's former stunt coordinator, Mike Torino, emerged from a rental van with professional camera equipment that had been driven overnight from Los Angeles. 2 camera operators and a sound engineer followed, their gear cases containing surveillance technology typically reserved for major motion picture productions. Just like the old days, Mike grinned, setting up tripods with practiced efficiency. "Except this time we're not staging fights. We're documenting real ones." Paula Rodriguez coordinated the operation with military precision, her intelligence background evident in how she positioned equipment for maximum coverage while maintaining concealment. Hidden cameras would capture multiple angles of Kane's crew conducting their next sweep of veteran encampments. "Thursday morning raids are their pattern," she explained, marking positions on a detailed map. "They hit when most veterans are scattered at VA appointments or job interviews. maximum psychological impact with minimum resistance. Eddie Chun volunteered to remain visible as bait while others concealed themselves with cameras. His Gulf War service and PTSD made him appear particularly vulnerable, exactly the kind of target Kane's crew preferred. The sacrifice required genuine courage. If the operation failed, Eddie would face brutal retaliation. Jerry Kowalski positioned himself with a smartphone rigged for live streaming, his wheelchair providing both mobility and sympathetic imagery that would resonate with social media audiences. Despite his 71 years and combat disabilities, the Marine's tactical mind remained sharp. Channel 7 on the police radio, Jerry said, adjusting his phone's camera angle. Paula intercepted their communications. They're planning something big for tomorrow morning. Equipment testing revealed the scope of their surveillance network. Wireless cameras hidden in debris provided multiple angles. Directional microphones captured conversations from hundreds of yards away, and internet connectivity would allow real-time uploading to cloud storage that couldn't be confiscated or destroyed. The key is documentation, Seagal explained to the team. We need evidence that proves systematic harassment, not isolated incidents. Pattern recognition that shows conspiracy rather than coincidence. But their preparation was interrupted by Jerry rolling up at high speed, his repaired wheelchair moving with urgent purpose. His face was grim as he delivered intelligence that changed everything. They hit Morrison Street last night, he reported breathlessly. Destroyed everything, tents, belongings, medical supplies. 3 vets hospitalized, including old Frank, who never hurt anybody in his life. The escalation was significant. Previous harassment had focused on intimidation and theft, but hospitalizing elderly veterans crossed into felony assault territory. The Kane family was no longer subtle in their systematic oppression. It gets worse, Jerry continued. They're not just clearing camps anymore. They're targeting anyone who's helped document their activities. Frank's volunteer doctor got his clinic windows smashed. The veterinarian who treated Ranger received anonymous death threats. Paula's expression darkened as she processed the intelligence. They're moving to phase 2. Eliminate witnesses, destroy evidence, terrorize anyone who might testify. Classic organized crime tactics. The warehouse fell silent as everyone understood the implications. This was no longer about individual harassment or property development. It was about systematic elimination of anyone who threatened the Kane family's criminal enterprise. How many people know about tomorrow's operation? Seagal asked. Too many, Paula admitted. Word spreads fast in the veteran community. If we've got informants, Kane knows exactly what we're planning. Jerry's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His face went pale as he read, then looked up at the team with genuine fear in his bright blue eyes. It's a trap, he said quietly. They're not planning a sweep. They're planning an ambush. Steel Indian School Park's secluded northeast corner provided natural cover for unusual activities, its mature trees and rolling terrain offering concealment from casual observers. At 2 p.m., Steven Seagal led a group of homeless veterans through modified aikido techniques that emphasize survival over sport, adaptation over tradition. The veterans formed a rough circle on the grass, some skeptical about martial arts effectiveness. Against armed police officers, others desperate enough to try anything that might provide protection. Marcus sat nearby with Ranger, both recovering but present to show solidarity with their community. Aikido means way of harmony, Seagal explained, demonstrating basic stances that emphasized balance and mobility. We don't meet force with force, we redirect aggression, use the attacker's energy against them. Eddie Chun, still volunteering as bait for tomorrow's operation, learned pressure point techniques that could disable without leaving obvious evidence. His Gulf War training helped him grasp concepts quickly, muscle memory adapting civilian techniques to military applications. The goal isn't to win fights, Seagal continued, working with each veteran individually. It's to create opportunities for escape. Stay alive, stay mobile, stay together. Jerry Kowalski presented unique challenges, his wheelchair requiring completely different defensive strategies. Seagal spent extra time adapting techniques for his situation, showing how wheelchair mobility could become tactical advantage rather than vulnerability. Your chair is a weapon, Seagal demonstrated, teaching Jerry how to use momentum and positioning to defend against standing attackers. speed, surprise, and superior understanding of physics. Paula Rodriguez needed minimal instruction, her military background translating easily to civilian applications. But Seagal recognized something else in her movements, the efficient brutality of someone trained to kill enemies rather than subdue criminals. Remember, he cautioned her specifically, we're not in Iraq anymore. These are American citizens, however misguided. Minimum necessary force. The training session revealed hidden strengths within the veteran community. Despite homelessness, disability, and systematic oppression, these were people who had once sworn to defend their country. That commitment hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting for appropriate leadership. In aikido, we use the attacker's force against them, Seagal explained, demonstrating throws that used momentum rather than strength. Same principle applies to corruption. Let them overextend, then redirect their energy. Veterans gained confidence as they mastered basic techniques. Men and women who had felt powerless against systematic oppression began to understand that they possessed resources beyond official recognition. Military training, combined with spiritual discipline, created formidable opposition to bullying. But the session was interrupted when Detective Rita Morales appeared at the park entrance, approaching cautiously with hands visible and expression conflicted. Her arrival sent ripples of tension through the group. Police presence usually meant trouble for homeless veterans. I need to talk to you, she called out to Seagal, staying at respectful distance from the training circle. There's something you need to know about tomorrow's operation. Her tone suggested internal conflict between professional duty and personal conscience. 15 years of police work had taught her to recognize corruption, but challenging Deputy Chief Kane required courage that could end her career. It's not good news, she continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't being observed. What you're planning, they know about it. And they're planning something worse. The veterans exchanged worried looks as Morales approached, her expression grave with the weight of information that could save lives or destroy careers. The afternoon's training had prepared them for physical confrontation, but not for systematic betrayal by the very institutions sworn to protect them. Seagal stood, slowly, reading the conflict in Morales' face. How bad is it? Bad enough that I'm risking everything just talking to you, she replied quietly. Meet me tonight. Denny's near the airport, 6 o'clock. Come alone and bring your spiritual training. You're going to need it. The Denny's restaurant near Sky Harbor Airport carried the sterile, fluorescent atmosphere of 24-hour establishments that served travelers more than locals. At 6 p.m., Detective Rita Morales sat in a corner booth, nervously checking over her shoulder while nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Steven Seagal slid into the opposite seat with fluid grace, his presence immediately calming despite the gravity of their meeting. His dark eyes assessed the restaurant's exits and potential threats with professional thoroughness before focusing completely on Morales. Thank you for coming, she said, pulling a manila folder from her jacket. I've been building a case against the Kane family for 8 months, but I've never had enough evidence to move forward. The folder contained internal police memos that painted a disturbing picture of systematic corruption, quality of life enforcement directives that specifically targeted homeless veterans, budget allocations that funded harassment campaigns, disguised as community policing, and personnel assignments that placed Kane loyalists in positions where they could cover up complaints. This is why I became a cop, Morales said, her voice tight with frustration. To protect people who can't protect themselves. Instead, I'm watching my department terrorize heroes who served our country. Seagal studied the documents with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to processing intelligence under pressure. Each memo revealed another layer of institutional rot, systematic abuse of police power for private profit disguised as legitimate law enforcement. Tomorrow's operation isn't what you think, Morales continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. They know about your surveillance plan. Kane's people have been monitoring veteran communications for weeks. The revelation hit like cold water. Paula's careful planning, Jerry's live streaming preparation, Eddie's willingness to serve as bait, all of it compromised by informants or intercepted communications that had given the Kane family complete tactical advantage. It gets worse, Morales said, sliding additional papers across the table. They've convinced federal marshals that your camps are drug distribution centers. Tomorrow's raid will involve federal agents who think they're breaking up a narcotics operation. Federal involvement changed everything. Local corruption could be exposed and prosecuted, but federal agents operating under false information would use overwhelming force against elderly veterans they believed were armed drug dealers. The potential for tragedy was enormous. How many agents? Seagal asked, his voice remaining calm despite the implications. 12 federal marshals, plus local backup. Full tactical gear, expecting armed resistance from organized criminals. Morales's hands shook as she delivered intelligence that could prevent a massacre. They have no idea they're about to assault homeless veterans. She slid a police radio across the table, its presence representing career suicide if discovered. Channel 7, low power frequency. I'll try to give you advance warning, but this is it for me. If they catch me helping you, I lose everything. The weight of her sacrifice wasn't lost on Seagal. 15 years of building a career, supporting a teenage daughter, serving her community, all of it risked to protect people that society had forgotten. Those veterans deserve better than what they're getting, she said, standing to leave. If you can expose this conspiracy, I'll testify. But tomorrow, you're completely on your own. As she walked away, Seagal understood that the morning would bring not just harassment, but potential bloodshed between federal agents and American veterans who had already sacrificed everything for their country. Dawn broke gray and threatening over Phoenix as homeless veterans scattered from their encampment at 5 a.m., carrying only essential belongings while abandoning the small comforts that had made concrete bridges feel like home. The evacuation proceeded with military precision despite the chaos of hasty departure. These were people who understood tactical withdrawal under pressure. Steven Seagal positioned himself in an abandoned building overlooking the camp, his Hollywood surveillance team deployed with professional equipment that would capture every moment of the coming confrontation. Hidden cameras provided multiple angles while Jerry Kowalski prepared his wheelchair-mounted smartphone for live streaming that could reach thousands of viewers in real time. The trap was set, but now they were setting their own counter-trap. Eddie Chun remained visible in the camp, moving between empty tents with the nervous energy of someone expecting trouble. His Gulf War service had prepared him for combat, but facing federal agents who believed he was an armed drug dealer required different courage entirely. Federal marshals incoming, crackled Morales's voice over the police radio. ETA 15 minutes. They're expecting armed resistance from organized narcotics distributors. Seagal's team made final adjustments to their equipment, ensuring that everything would upload automatically to cloud storage that couldn't be confiscated or destroyed. Whatever happened next would be preserved for the world to see. The federal convoy arrived with overwhelming force, armored vehicles, tactical gear, and agents prepared for urban warfare against heavily armed criminals. Their intelligence briefing had described a dangerous drug operation run by violent felons who wouldn't hesitate to kill law enforcement officers. But as they surrounded the camp, hidden cameras captured a different reality. Kane's crew arrived separately, planting evidence in abandoned tents while federal agents maintained their perimeter. Bags of white powder appeared in sleeping areas. Weapons were strategically placed near personal belongings, and drug paraphernalia was scattered with theatrical precision. They're planting evidence, Jerry whispered into his live stream, his phone capturing corrupt cops staging a crime scene. Watch this. They're literally manufacturing probable cause while federal agents wait outside. The live stream viewer count climbed rapidly as social media algorithms recognized viral content. Comments poured in from across the country. Hashtag Veteran Lives Matter hashtags spreading faster than the Kane family could possibly contain. When federal marshals finally entered the camp, they found exactly what Kane's intelligence had promised: drugs, weapons, and evidence of criminal enterprise. But they also found cameras documenting the planting of that evidence, live streams showing police corruption in real time, and a growing online audience watching institutional betrayal unfold. What the hell is this? Demanded the federal team leader as he discovered surveillance equipment hidden throughout the camp. Professional-grade cameras, wireless transmission equipment, and live streaming technology that had captured every moment of evidence planting. Kane's face went pale as he realized the trap had been turned against them. His carefully orchestrated operation had become a public relations disaster broadcast to 50,000 viewers and climbing. Social media exploded with outrage as Americans watched their veterans being framed by corrupt police. "Shut it down," Kane screamed at his officers. But the damage was already done. Cloud storage meant the evidence couldn't be destroyed, federal witnesses meant local corruption couldn't bury the incident, and viral social media meant the whole country was watching. Jerry grinned from his concealed position, his live stream, reaching 75,000 viewers as news outlets began picking up the story. "Cheese, Deputy Chief Kane. You're famous now." The morning's victory was complete, but Seagal understood that cornered predators were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. Phoenix City Hall's marble steps had hosted countless political demonstrations, but rarely had media attention, focused so intensely on issues affecting homeless veterans. By 3 p.m., national news vans lined the street while Mayor Patricia Sullivan prepared to address a scandal that had exploded from local corruption into federal investigation territory. Steven Seagal stood with Marcus Webb, Jerry Kowalski, and Paula Rodriguez as the mayor approached the podium, their presence representing a veteran community that had finally found its voice. Jerry's live stream that morning had reached 200,000 viewers before major networks picked up the story, transforming local harassment into national outrage. "The actions documented this morning represent a complete betrayal of our city's values," Mayor Sullivan declared, her political instincts recognizing that supporting veterans was safer than defending corrupt police. Effective immediately, all officers involved in this incident are suspended pending full federal investigation. The crowd of supporters included veteran organizations from across Arizona, civil rights advocates who recognized systematic oppression when they saw it, and ordinary citizens outraged by the misuse of tax dollars for private profit. Social media had transformed the Kane family's quiet corruption into very public accountability. Media interviews revealed stories that had been systematically ignored. Jerry demonstrated his sabotaged wheelchair while explaining how police had tried to kill him through mechanical tampering. Paula displayed documentation of harassment campaigns that coincided perfectly with real estate development timelines. Marcus spoke quietly about watching his service dog being kicked for entertainment. "These are American heroes," declared Senator Maria Vasquez, who had flown in from Washington as soon as her staff briefed her on the viral video. "They served our country in foreign wars, and they deserve better than being terrorized on American streets." Support donations poured in through social media platforms, with temporary housing arranged for displaced veterans and medical care provided for those injured during harassment campaigns. The community response demonstrated that most Americans still honored military service, even when local institutions had failed. Seagal received the ceremonial key to the city from Mayor Sullivan, though he accepted it on behalf of the veteran community rather than personal recognition. His spiritual training had taught him that individual glory mattered less than collective justice. "This belongs to all of them," he said, gesturing toward the veterans beside him. "I just reminded everyone that heroes deserve protection, not persecution." The afternoon celebration at the community center felt like genuine victory. Veterans shared their first hot meals in weeks, while volunteers provided clothing, medical care, and housing assistance. Ranger played with children from supporting families, his injury healing as his community found hope. But Paula approached Seagal with troubling intelligence that dampened the celebration's euphoria. Her military training had taught her to anticipate enemy responses to tactical defeats, and the Kane family's silence was more ominous than their previous aggression. "I intercepted police communications," she said quietly, showing him encrypted messages on her smartphone. "They're not giving up." Internal chatter suggests they're planning something bigger, elimination rather than intimidation. The veteran intelligence specialist's face was grim as she delivered her assessment. This celebration might be premature. Cornered predators don't surrender, they escalate. And the Kane family just lost everything publicly. Seagal looked around the community center, seeing veterans and families celebrating what they believed was permanent victory. But Paula's warning reminded him that systematic corruption didn't disappear through single confrontations, no matter how public or embarrassing. "How long do we have?" he asked. That Paula's expression was that of a soldier delivering casualty estimates. "Based on their communication patterns and resources, maybe 12 hours before they move against everyone who helped expose them." The celebration continued around them, but both understood that the real battle was just beginning. The coordinated assault began at precisely 2 a.m. Friday morning, time for maximum psychological impact, when victims would be most vulnerable and least able to organize resistance. Military-style precision marked every aspect of the operation. Simultaneous strikes across multiple locations, overwhelming force applied without warning, and systematic elimination of witnesses who could testify about Kane family corruption. Marcus Webb was walking ranger near his temporary housing when 3 unmarked vehicles boxed him in 6 blocks from safety. The attack was professionally brutal, calculated to cause maximum injury while maintaining plausible deniability about police involvement. He was found unconscious 30 minutes later. Rangers seized by animal control officers who claimed the dog was evidence in an ongoing investigation. Jerry Kowalski's sabotaged wheelchair sent him tumbling down concrete steps outside the VA Medical Center, his 71-year-old body no match for 20 feet of uncontrolled descent. Witnesses reported seeing police officers in the area just before his accident, but security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the critical time frame. Paula Rodriguez simply vanished. Her intelligence background made her the most dangerous witness to Kane family operations, so her elimination required different tactics. She was arrested on fabricated drug charges during a pre-dawn raid, her veteran housing searched by officers who discovered significant quantities of narcotics that any intelligence professional would recognize as planted evidence. Eddie Chin disappeared entirely, his absence discovered only when volunteers arrived at the community center to find his belongings scattered and bloodstained. No arrest records, no hospital admissions, no official acknowledgement that he had ever existed. Just an empty space where a Gulf War veteran had stood the day before. The systematic nature of the attacks was unmistakable. Every veteran who had appeared on camera, every volunteer who had provided assistance, every witness who could testify about police corruption, all neutralized in a single night of carefully coordinated violence disguised as random crime. Seagal's hotel room became a fortress as news of the attacks reached him through emergency phone calls and frantic text messages. His Hollywood surveillance team had fled the city after receiving death threats, their equipment confiscated during random traffic stops that occurred simultaneously across Phoenix. Physical evidence vanished from police storage facilities through clerical errors and administrative oversight. Video documentation disappeared from servers through technical malfunctions that affected only files related to Kane family activities. Witness statements were misfiled in databases that somehow lost all records of veteran harassment. "They're erasing us," Jerry called from his hospital bed, his voice weak but determined. Multiple fractures from his wheelchair accident would keep him immobilized for months, effectively eliminating his ability to testify or organize resistance. The media narrative shifted overnight. Stories about police corruption were replaced by reports of vagrant violence and homeless drug operations. Veterans who had been portrayed as heroes 24 hours earlier were now described as dangerous criminals whose arrests proved that aggressive policing was necessary for public safety. Mayor Sullivan's office issued carefully worded statements about ongoing investigations and due process, political language that committed to nothing while appearing concerned about justice. The ceremonial key to the city was quietly forgotten as municipal attorneys advised distance from potential liability. At 6 a.m., Seagal sat alone in his hotel room, surrounded by news reports that transformed his allies into criminals and his victory into defeat. The systematic elimination of witnesses and evidence demonstrated that the Kane family's corruption ran deeper than individual officers. It was institutional rot that extended throughout Phoenix's power structure. His phone showed missed calls from former military contacts, Hollywood associates, and legal advocates who had been intimidated into withdrawing support. The machine had turned against him with overwhelming force, and for the first time in decades, Steven Seagal faced the possibility of complete defeat. That Marcus's final text message blinked on his screen. "They're coming for everyone who helped us." The war was far from over, and he was now fighting it alone. Phoenix General Hospital's fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across Marcus Webb's battered face as Steven Seagal sat vigil beside the unconscious veteran's bed. Multiple monitors tracked vital signs that fluctuated with each labored breath, while bandages covered injuries that spoke of professional brutality. maximum damage inflicted with surgical precision to avoid obvious police fingerprints. The attack had been calculated to destroy more than flesh and bone. Marcus's independence, his dignity, his connection to the world beyond his disability, all of it hung in the balance with machines that measured the difference between life and surrender. His service dog was gone, seized as evidence by animal control officers who answered to the same corrupt system that had orchestrated this systematic destruction. Hospital staff whispered among themselves about the vagrant who got what was coming, their casual cruelty revealing how effectively the Kane family had poisoned public perception. These were the same people who would honor veterans on holidays while ignoring their suffering during the other 364 days of the year. Seagal's meditation practice fought against rising rage as he processed the scope of devastation. Jerry remained in intensive care with multiple fractures from his wheelchair accident. Paula had vanished into the justice system under fabricated drug charges. Eddie Chun had simply disappeared, his existence erased as thoroughly as if he'd never served his country or sought shelter under Phoenix bridges. Phone calls to former allies went unanswered as intimidation spread through networks that had briefly supported veteran rights. His Hollywood surveillance team had fled after receiving death threats, their professional equipment confiscated during random traffic stops. Legal advocates who had pledged support were now unreachable, their offices citing scheduling conflicts and caseload pressures. The spiritual training that had sustained him through decades of conflict seemed inadequate against institutional corruption this comprehensive. His aikido philosophy emphasized redirecting enemy force, but how could principles of harmony overcome systematic evil that operated through legal channels and official authority? Marcus stirred briefly, his weathered hand gripping Seagal's with surprising strength despite his injuries. Blind eyes opened, unfocused but desperate to communicate something vital before consciousness slipped away again. "They're coming for everyone who helped us," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the mechanical breathing of life support equipment. Paula had evidence, hidden location, his grip tightened with the urgency of someone who understood that this might be his final opportunity to pass crucial intelligence. Years of military service had taught him to prioritize mission success over personal survival, and protecting his community remained his primary objective even while fighting for his own life. The warehouse, east side, she kept backup files. Marcus's words came in fragments between labored breaths. Federal contacts, someone clean, find the truth. He lost consciousness again as nurses rushed in, their professional efficiency focused on medical crises rather than the larger tragedy playing out across their city. Marcus's final words carried the weight of a soldier's last mission briefing, intelligence that could either save his community or die with him in this sterile hospital room. Seagal stood slowly, his meditation complete. Sometimes a warrior faced insurmountable odds alone, but this warrior would not abandon his new family to systematic destruction. The phoenix had to rise from ashes, and sometimes that required walking through fire first. Steven Seagal's hotel room had become a monastery of contemplation, prayer beads clicking softly in his weathered hands as he sat in lotus position at 10 a.m., finding his spiritual center amid the wreckage of apparent defeat. The systematic destruction of his allies had isolated him completely, but isolation had always been where he found his greatest strength. Phone calls to old military contacts initially went straight to voicemail. Fear was a contagious disease. In networks where careers could be destroyed by association with controversial causes, the Kane family's reach extended far beyond Phoenix. Their political connections creating ripple effects that discouraged support from coast to coast. But gradually, courage began to overcome caution. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, his former Navy SEAL training instructor who now ran a private security firm in Colorado, called back after seeing news coverage. The old warrior's voice carried the steel that had forged special operations soldiers for 3 decades. "Seagal, you stepped in some serious shit down there," Bradley said without preamble. "But sometimes that's where real soldiers prove their worth. What do you need?" 2 Hollywood stunt coordinators overcame their initial fear when Seagal explained the stakes in terms they could understand. Good guys versus bad guys, with no script to guarantee happy endings. Their technical expertise could provide surveillance and documentation that couldn't be intimidated or bought. Most importantly, Detective Rita Morales risked everything by providing inside information about Kane family operations. Her 15-year career hung by threads as she shared intelligence that could save lives or end her ability to provide for her teenage daughter. "They're planning something final," she reported during a clandestine meeting at an abandoned gas station. "Complete elimination of witnesses, evidence, and anyone who could resurrect the investigation. Military precision, unlimited resources, federal protection through their political connections." Honest cops began emerging from the shadows, like desert flowers after rare rain. Officers who had watched corruption flourish while feeling powerless to act alone found courage in Seagal's example. They formed a secret network of intelligence gathering and evidence preservation that the Kane family couldn't detect or infiltrate. Paulus. Hidden evidence cache became their holy grail, documentation that could prove federal racketeering charges and bypass local corruption entirely. Her military intelligence background meant she had prepared for exactly this scenario, creating backup systems that would survive systematic destruction. "She's being held at Malcolm Kane's construction company warehouse," Morales reported, her voice tight with the strain of betraying her badge to serve justice. "Illegal detention, but they're calling it protective custody while processing her drug charges." The team that assembled at sunset represented something the Kane family hadn't anticipated: community rising from systematic oppression. Military veterans, honest police officers, Hollywood technical experts, and civilian volunteers who refused to accept that corruption was inevitable. "Sometimes the action hero needs a supporting cast," Seagal told the group, his spiritual training helping him recognize that individual heroism was less powerful than collective action. "Tonight, we take back our city." The warehouse district where Paula was being held looked like countless others throughout Phoenix. Industrial buildings that could hide systematic evil behind legitimate business facades. But this time, the approaching force represented justice rather than oppression. As they prepared to move, Seagal understood that the next few hours would determine whether American veterans received the protection they deserved, or whether institutional corruption would triumph over individual courage. The Phoenix was ready to rise, but first it had to survive the flames that had consumed everything else. The industrial warehouse district stretched across Phoenix's eastern boundary like a concrete maze designed for concealment, its corrugated buildings and chain-link fences providing perfect cover for activities that required privacy from official oversight. At 11 p.m., Steven Seagal led a two-pronged rescue operation that would either liberate Paula Rodriguez or trigger the final confrontation with Kane family corruption. Team Alpha moved toward Malcolm Kane's construction company warehouse, where Paula was being held in illegal detention, her military intelligence background making her too dangerous to process through normal judicial channels. Team Beta infiltrated the police evidence storage facility, where crucial documentation waited for systematic destruction. Detective Rita Morales led the evidence recovery team through her intimate knowledge of police procedures and security protocols. Her 15-year career had prepared her for this moment of choosing between institutional loyalty and individual conscience, between protecting corrupt colleagues and serving actual justice. "Evidence Locker 7 contains Paula's files," she whispered into her radio as they approached the storage facility. "Federal racketeering documentation, financial records, witness statements, everything needed to bypass local corruption and trigger federal intervention." Seagal's infiltration team used classic military tactics adapted for urban environment: climbing, stealth movement, and pressure point attacks that neutralized guards without causing permanent injury. His aikido training proved invaluable for silent takedowns that left opponents unconscious but unharmed. The warehouse complex revealed the scope of Kane family operations. Legitimate construction equipment provided cover for money laundering facilities, while private security contractors offered plausible deniability for activities that required violence. This was organized crime disguised as municipal improvement. Paula was found in the basement office, chained to industrial piping but alert and defiant despite days of captivity. Her military training had prepared her for interrogation and isolation, but her relief at seeing Seagal was unmistakable. "It's a trap," she whispered urgently as he worked to free her restraints. "They knew you'd come." Kane's waiting upstairs with enough firepower to start a small war. Her intelligence background had allowed her to gather crucial information even while captive. The Kane family's desperation had led to tactical mistakes. Too many witnesses to their illegal detention, too much evidence of federal crimes, too obvious a pattern of systematic oppression. Ranger's here too, she continued, nodding toward a locked storage room. They're using him as leverage, but they're also keeping evidence of animal cruelty that could destroy them if it reaches the right prosecutor. The golden retriever was found weak but alive, his condition showing systematic neglect designed to maximize psychological pressure on Marcus and Seagal. Animal cruelty charges would resonate with juries in ways that financial corruption might not, providing emotional weight to legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Team Beta's evidence recovery exceeded all expectations. Paula's intelligence network had created backup systems that preserved documentation even through systematic destruction. Financial records, witness statements, federal communications, everything needed to prove racketeering was stored in multiple locations. We've got enough to destroy them, Morales reported through encrypted radio communication. Federal jurisdiction, congressional oversight, media attention. The whole machine they've built to protect themselves becomes evidence of conspiracy. But as both teams prepared to extract their prizes, Kane family reinforcements surrounded the warehouse complex with overwhelming force. Professional security contractors, corrupt police officers, and federal agents who still believed they were stopping organized crime, all converging on the industrial district with orders to eliminate witnesses permanently. Seagal looked at Paula and Ranger, both symbols of what he was fighting to protect. The next few minutes would determine whether systematic corruption triumphed or whether individual courage could still change the world. Then we finish this tonight, he said quietly, helping Paula to her feet while Ranger limped beside them toward whatever waited upstairs. The warehouse's upper level had been transformed into an arena of confrontation, its industrial lighting casting harsh shadows across Deputy Chief Floyd Kane's tactical command center. At midnight, Kane waited with 6 corrupt officers and private security contractors, confident that his carefully orchestrated trap would eliminate the last threats to his family's criminal empire permanently. Cages lined one wall, Ranger whimpering in obvious distress, his condition designed to maximize psychological pressure on anyone who might rescue him. The golden retriever represented more than Marcus Webb's independence. He symbolized the innocent victims of systematic oppression who couldn't defend themselves against institutional power. Welcome to the end of your little crusade, Kane announced as Seagal emerged from the basement with Paula at his side. His expensive suit was rumpled from hours of waiting, his red face broadcasting the rage of someone whose authority had been challenged publicly and decisively. The negotiation that followed revealed the true scope of Kane family desperation. Complete surrender, permanent exile from Phoenix, and silence about everything witnessed. Those were the terms offered for Ranger's life and Marcus's survival in the hospital. Otherwise, accidents would continue until every veteran who had supported the resistance was eliminated. You're outnumbered 8-1, Grandpa. Kane sneered, his confidence returning as armed men took positions throughout the warehouse. Time to learn that this isn't one of your movies. This is real life, where money and connections beat martial arts bullshit every time. But Seagal's assessment of the tactical situation revealed advantages that Kane's arrogance had overlooked. The warehouse environment provided classic action sequence opportunities, elevated platforms for superior positioning, chains and industrial equipment that could become improvised weapons, multiple levels that allowed vertical movement during confrontation. Paula's intelligence training proved invaluable for identifying alternate escape routes and communication protocols. Her military background complemented Seagal's combat experience, creating a team that understood both strategy and tactics better than Kane's hired thugs. Counteroffer, Seagal said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced worse odds and survived. You surrender now, and I won't have to hurt anyone. Kane's laughter echoed through the warehouse, joined by his men who saw only an aging action star facing impossible odds. Their collective arrogance blinded them to the spiritual discipline and tactical expertise that had sustained Seagal through decades of real conflict. You think this is entertainment? Kane continued his rant, revealing more intelligence about his operations with each word. My family's been running this city for 3 generations. We own judges, prosecutors, federal agents, everyone who could possibly threaten us. But his monologue was interrupted by sounds from outside. Vehicles surrounding the warehouse, tactical teams taking positions, federal agents who had finally received accurate intelligence about Kane family operations. Team Beta's evidence recovery had triggered the response that systematic corruption had prevented for years. Kane's radio crackled, with reports of simultaneous arrests across Phoenix. Malcolm Kane in custody, corrupt officers surrounded at various locations, financial assets frozen through federal warrants. The criminal enterprise was collapsing as evidence that couldn't be destroyed or intimidated reached prosecutors who couldn't be bought. "It's over," Seagal said, not even breathing hard despite the tactical situation. "Your empire is falling down around you." Kane pulled his service weapon with shaking hands, his final option, the one that had always been his weakness: personal violence when institutional power failed him. The warehouse fell silent except for distant sirens and the sound of a desperate man's last stand. "Not while I'm still breathing," Kane snarled, finger tightening on the trigger as federal agents prepared to breach the warehouse doors. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as Steven Seagal transformed from negotiator to warrior in the space between heartbeats. Deputy Chief Kane's service weapon wavered in trembling hands as the aikido master moved with fluid precision that turned the industrial environment into his personal dojo. The first attacker came from Seagal's left, a private security contractor who mistook size for advantage. Classic aikido redirection sent the man's momentum into a concrete support pillar with bone-jarring impact, his weapon clattering harmlessly across the warehouse floor while he slumped unconscious. The Kane's corrupt officers spread out in tactical formation, but their police training had emphasized crowd control over combat against martial arts masters. Seagal flowed between them like water around stones, each movement building on the last, as he demonstrated why aikido had been developed to handle multiple attackers simultaneously. The second gunman found his wrist locked in Seagal's iron grip. Pressure points sending paralyzing pain up his arm until his finger released the trigger involuntarily. The weapon spun away as nerve clusters were manipulated with surgical precision, leaving the man conscious but completely helpless. Paula Rodriguez contributed her military expertise, coordinating their movements while securing Ranger's release from his cage. Her intelligence background showed as she identified tactical advantages that Seagal could exploit: elevated platforms, industrial equipment, and environmental hazards that could disable opponents without permanent injury. The warehouse's vertical space became Seagal's ally as he used chains hanging from ceiling-mounted cranes to swing between levels, his movements as graceful as his movie choreography, but powered by genuine life-or-death necessity. Each technique flowed into the next with spiritual discipline that made violence look like dance. 2 more security contractors rushed him simultaneously, confident that coordinated assault would overwhelm individual skill. But Seagal's decades of training had prepared him for exactly this scenario: multiple attackers moving with predictable tactics against someone who understood momentum, leverage, and human anatomy better than they understood their own limitations. The first man's charge became an involuntary cartwheel as his ankle was swept while his upper body continued forward, physics ensuring that he landed hard but not fatally. The second attacker found himself airborne through pure aikido technique, his own aggressive energy redirected upward until gravity took over. Kane's remaining men hesitated as they watched their colleagues neutralized through what looked like effortless technique. These were professionals accustomed to intimidating civilians, not facing masters who had spent lifetimes perfecting combat arts that emphasized efficiency over brutality. "In aikido, we seek harmony even in conflict," Seagal said calmly, not even breathing hard despite the physical demands of multiple simultaneous confrontations. "Violence ends when aggression is redirected properly." But Kane himself remained the primary threat, his service weapon still trained on Ranger's cage while federal agents prepared to breach the warehouse entrances. His desperate finger remained on the trigger, ready to destroy innocent life rather than accept consequences for systematic corruption. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as Paula worked to free the injured service dog, her one good hand moving efficiently despite the chaos surrounding them. Ranger whimpered but tried to stand, his loyalty to Marcus transcending his own pain and fear. Outside, federal agents counted down to their final assault on the Kane family's last stronghold. Federal agents burst through warehouse doors with tactical precision as deputy chief. Kane's service weapon trembled in hands that had never faced genuine consequences. The corrupt official found himself surrounded by law enforcement professionals who finally possessed accurate intelligence about his criminal enterprise. Their automatic weapons trained on someone they now recognized as organized crime rather than legitimate authority. "Drop your weapon," commanded the federal team leader, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone backed by overwhelming force and legal jurisdiction. "This is over, Kane." But Kane's desperation had reached the point where rational calculation no longer applied. Years of immunity from consequences had left him psychologically unprepared for accountability, his worldview collapsing as federal agents treated him like any other criminal rather than respected law enforcement official. "You don't understand," Kane screamed, his weapon swinging wildly between targets. "My family built this city. We made it safe for decent people. These homeless freaks were destroying everything we worked for." Detective Rita Morales stepped through the federal perimeter, evidence folders in her hands containing documentation that would destroy the Kane family's criminal empire completely. Her 15-year career had led to this moment of choosing justice over institutional loyalty, individual conscience over collective corruption. "Federal racketeering, conspiracy, civil rights violations," she announced, her voice steady despite the career suicide she was committing. "We have financial records, witness testimony, and documented evidence of systematic oppression disguised as law enforcement." The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Paula's intelligence background had created backup systems that preserved documentation through systematic destruction attempts. Bank records showing illegal money flows, construction contracts awarded without proper bidding, municipal resources used for private profit. Every aspect of the Kane family's operations was documented with military precision. Kane's political connections evaporated as federal jurisdiction trumped local corruption. Judges who had dismissed veteran complaints found their own communications subpoenaed. Prosecutors who had buried evidence faced obstruction charges. City officials who had enabled systematic oppression discovered that federal investigations couldn't be stopped through municipal influence. "The whole machine you built to protect yourselves becomes evidence of conspiracy," Morales continued, spreading documents across a makeshift table while federal agents maintained security. "Every cover-up, every dismissed complaint, every buried investigation, all of it proves systematic criminal enterprise." Kane's service weapon finally dropped from nerveless fingers as the scope of his defeat became undeniable. His brother Malcolm was already in federal custody, their construction company assets frozen, their political protection network collapsing as self-preservation overcame loyalty among former allies. But the true victory was represented by Ranger. Limping toward Paula's outstretched hand, the golden retriever's survival symbolizing the resilience of everyone the Kane family had tried to destroy. His injuries would heal, just as Marcus's would, just as the veteran communities would. Federal agents applied handcuffs to Kane with the same professional efficiency they would use on any other organized crime figure. His expensive suit and police credentials meant nothing when faced with evidence that couldn't be intimidated, witnesses who couldn't be bought, and prosecutors who couldn't be influenced through local connections. "You're just one man," Kane said to Seagal with genuine bewilderment as federal agents led him toward waiting vehicles. "How did you bring down my entire family?" Seagal retrieved his prayer beads from the warehouse floor, his spiritual training, helping him find calm amid the chaos of justice finally being served. The answer was simpler than Kane could understand. Individual courage could indeed change systems when it inspired others to remember their own moral obligations. "I didn't," Seagal replied quietly. "Community did. I just reminded them of their strength." Outside, coordinated federal raids were arresting Kane family associates across Phoenix, their criminal empire finally facing consequences that local corruption had prevented for generations. 3 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Phoenix General Hospital buzzed with activity that had nothing to do with medical emergencies. Marcus Webb sat upright in his bed, alert and healing well despite the severity of his injuries, while Ranger's tail provided constant percussion against the floor, a metronome of pure joy that had replaced the silence of separation. Steven Seagal arrived for his daily visit carrying legal documents that represented transformation beyond personal recovery. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case using Paula's evidence and witness testimony, their racketeering charges ensuring that the Kane family's criminal enterprise would face justice that local corruption couldn't circumvent. "How are you feeling?" Seagal asked, noting the return of military bearing to Marcus's posture despite his hospital gown and medical equipment. "Like I remember what hope feels like," Marcus replied, his weathered hands finding Ranger's head with the gentle precision that defined their partnership. "The doctors say I'll be discharged tomorrow. First time in years I'm not worried about where I'll sleep." The systematic changes throughout Phoenix reflected federal intervention scope and permanence. Veterans were receiving proper medical care through expanded VA programs, housing assistance that actually provided homes rather than bureaucratic delays, and legal representation that couldn't be intimidated or bought by local power structures. Jerry Kowalski had been fitted with a new wheelchair, top-of-the-line equipment that reflected both medical necessity and community support. His appointment as peer counselor at the VA represented recognition that military experience provided unique qualifications for helping other veterans navigate civilian challenges. "They want me to help other disabled vets understand their rights," Jerry had explained during his own hospital visit, his bright blue eyes sparkling with renewed purpose. "Turns out getting your ass kicked by corrupt cops qualifies you to prevent it from happening to others." Paula Rodriguez's transformation was perhaps most dramatic. Her arrest on fabricated drug charges had been dismissed with prejudice, but more importantly, she had been hired as Phoenix's new veteran advocate, a position created specifically to prevent systematic abuse from recurring. "Intelligence training for veteran services," she had said when accepting the appointment. "Using military skills to serve military families instead of fighting foreign wars." Detective Rita Morales' promotion to deputy chief represented institutional change beyond individual justice. Her mandate was comprehensive department reform, rooting out corruption that had flourished through generations of political protection and willful blindness. "Clean cops were always there," she had explained to federal investigators. "They just needed leadership that couldn't be bought or intimidated." Marcus signed his discharge papers with the careful precision of someone who understood that bureaucratic documents could represent freedom or oppression depending on who controlled them. His new apartment was downtown, city housing program placement that acknowledged his military service rather than treating it as irrelevant ancient history. "Where will you go from here?" Seagal asked as hospital staff prepared Marcus and Ranger for their transition back into civilian life. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something approaching peace. "Downtown. I have an apartment now, thanks to the housing program. Real address, mail delivery, neighbors who know my name instead of just seeing problems." They walked toward the hospital exit together, three friends who had found family through shared struggle against systematic oppression. Ranger's limp was barely noticeable now, his recovery paralleling his owner's return to dignity and independence. "I'm not afraid to ride the bus anymore," Marcus continued, his white cane tapping rhythm against hospital tiles. "Funny how courage is contagious when the right person demonstrates it first." The afternoon sunlight felt warmer somehow as they emerged from medical sterility into Phoenix air that no longer carried the threat of systematic harassment. 6 months after Deputy Chief Kane's arrest, the grand opening ceremony for the Marcus Webb Veterans Support Center drew crowds that reflected Phoenix's transformation from systematic oppression to community support. The building itself occupied prime downtown real estate formerly owned by the Kane family. Luxury condos converted to veteran services through federal asset forfeiture that ensured criminal profits served their victims. American flags lined the entrance while veterans from across Arizona gathered to witness institutional change that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Military families, federal representatives, and city officials who had chosen justice over political convenience created an atmosphere of celebration that transcended partisan divisions. Marcus Webb approached the podium with Ranger at his side. both of them representing resilience that had survived systematic attempts at destruction. His prepared remarks were brief, but carried the weight of experience that academic theories about veteran services couldn't match. 6 months ago, I was invisible, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd. Society saw problems instead of people, burdens instead of service, waste instead of sacrifice. But someone reminded this community that honor still exists, that courage is contagious, and that heroes come in many forms. Jerry Kowalski demonstrated the center's wheelchair accessibility features with obvious pride, his new equipment allowing mobility that harassment had tried to steal. His appointment as peer counselor had given him purpose beyond survival, using his experience to help other disabled veterans navigate systems designed by people who had never faced similar challenges. Paula Rodriguez guided tours of job training facilities that reflected understanding of military skills, civilian applications. Her position as veteran advocate had evolved into comprehensive reform of how Phoenix treated its most vulnerable citizens, proving that intelligence training could serve humanitarian purposes as effectively as military ones. The center's services went beyond basic needs to address systemic issues that had created veteran homelessness. Legal assistance that couldn't be intimidated, medical care that recognized service-connected conditions, housing programs that provided homes rather than bureaucratic delays, comprehensive support that acknowledged military service as qualification, rather than irrelevant history. Steven Seagal watched from the back of the crowd, avoiding cameras and media attention with practiced skill. His spiritual training had taught him that individual recognition mattered less than collective transformation, that true victory was measured in communities healed rather than personal glory achieved. As the ceremony concluded and crowds began to disperse, Seagal slipped away with characteristic quiet. His work in Phoenix was complete, but his understanding of justice had evolved through contact with people whose courage exceeded his own despite their circumstances. The final scene unfolded at a different bus stop across town. An elderly woman, struggling with heavy groceries while her adult son berated her publicly for imagined failures. His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had learned to hurt weaker people to feel powerful, his anger escalating as other passengers looked away. Seagal sat on a nearby bench, closing his book on Eastern philosophy as he observed the familiar pattern of bullying behavior. The woman's eyes met his briefly, hope flickering as she recognized something in his presence that suggested protection might be possible. But he stood slowly, prayer beads clicking softly as he moved. The son's tirade continued, but his voice faltered as he became aware of quiet authority approaching. Some battles never ended, some warriors never rested. But that was exactly why heroes existed, not for glory or recognition, but for people who needed protecting when no one else would act. The Phoenix had risen from ashes of systematic corruption, but individual courage remained the spark that ignited community transformation. As Seagal approached the escalating confrontation, his movements carried the calm certainty of someone who understood that justice was not a destination but a daily choice. In Phoenix and countless other cities, heroes disguised as ordinary people continued the work of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The story continued, one act of courage inspiring the next, one community at a time. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.